And in that election, he lost in the biggest popular landslide in American history. I think it was like 61% of the vote or something like that. Um, why, after that, it could have been very easy for that conservative movement to sort of fall apart or um, resolve to trim their sails and maybe moderate. Why did that not happen? Why did they keep fighting?
Right. I mean, that's the transition from before the storm to Nixon land. Why they kept fighting was because they believed they were fighting for civilization itself, right? I mean, they believed that a strong liberal state was, a violation of the very principles of liberty, that the world had been turned upside down. So they were never going to give up no matter what. I mean, they were like, in many respects, Bolsheviks, right? They'd keep on fighting. The reason the things they said in 1964 that were, anathema to the broad mass of American voters had become much more acceptable by first 1966 and then by 1968 was basically the 60s happened. The world did seem to be turning upside down. Uh, my book Nixon Land starts with the Watts riots. It's only like a few days after Lyndon Johnson signs the Voting Rights Act and basically declares America's racial problems all but over, that suddenly African Americans are burning down their neighborhood in Los Angeles, and it's being covered live on TV. At Berkeley, students are sitting down in the middle of campus. And suddenly, the idea that liberalism brought social chaos began to look like a message that you could take to the masses of voters. And the harbinger really was Ronald Reagan's success in 1966 at becoming governor. Uh, when he got the nomination, people were just as shocked as they had been at Barry Goldwater getting the nomination in 1964. But it wasn't, he hadn't won it by hook and by crook. He won it fair and square in a straight up election in which he was saying things like people were getting welfare and sitting on their porches and not even trying to get a job, saying things like people should have a right to not rent or sell their homes to African Americans because it was their property and it was their business what they did with it. And saying that the response that college administrators should be having to protesting students was to kick them out. And this sounded pretty good to even blue-collar working-class voters who had traditionally been the base of the Democratic Party.
So you pick the 1966 election of Reagan as a harbinger of what's to come. And Richard Nixon, of course, was the Republican nominee in 1968. Was he a Goldwater conservative, or did he learn some of these techniques from Reagan?
No, he was very much a pragmatist. I mean, what did he really believe? You can only kind of find that in the interstices, right? Because politicians, form themselves in the political contexts that they find. I mean, I think he was actually in his heart quite right wing. I think you can see that after he won his landslide in 1972 for his reelection, and he submitted a budget that was very Reaganite. Of course, he never got to do much with it because Watergate soon happened. But in 1966, I found a really interesting document in the Richard Nixon library in which basically Reagan wins the nomination, and Richard Nixon says, I really should have him in for a little chat, a little kind of training session about how he can win this election, because he's going to Washington and he's giving a speech to the National Press Corps, and they're going to eat him up. And well, lo and behold, Ronald Reagan does go and gives a speech to the National Press Corps, and he has these guys eating out of his hand. And so he's completely shocking Richard Nixon. He maybe has a little bit more on the ball that he had anticipated than a lot of people had anticipated. And lo and behold, he wins an election saying a lot of the same things Barry Goldwater was saying. And Richard Nixon was not the kind of person to poo-poo electoral success like that.
Right.
He's running in 1968, he could have ran as he did in 1960, which was, I'm more experienced. I'm this thoughtful, wise guy who's met with a lot of world leaders. He was almost like a Me Too candidate. I'll do the stuff that the Democrats want to do, just better and more efficiently. But instead, his main appeal is, I'm going to take the bull by the horns and restore law and order to the country. And you can see the commercials on YouTube. It's very Reaganite. You really see Reagan, kind of the student becoming the master, and Richard Nixon going to school on Ronald Reagan instead of the other way around.